8 months after winning a $2.4 million jet on a Mr. Beast challenge, Jabari Brown is about to become the 4th person arrested in a $3.6 million drug case. But he has no idea it's coming. It's Saturday morning at a private airport outside Asunción, Paraguay. The plane he co-piloted in landed the night before without a single problem. Everyone got off and went into the city. It was a completely normal night until one passenger walked back into the terminal the next morning to grab a bag someone left behind on that plane. He's allowed access to the plane, however, while heading back to exit the terminal, an officer stops him and asks him to open it. He hesitates and comes up with an excuse mentioning it's just musical instruments. The officer doesn't buy it. He unzips the bag, and by the end of that day, this airport becomes the center of an international narcotics investigation with Mr. Beast's winner Jabari Brown's name attached to it. However, to actually understand what's inside that bag and why a Mr. Beast contest winner ends up handcuffed over it, we have to rewind not back to the aircraft, but to the reason why anyone in Paraguay knew their names at all. In late 2025, a young man, Jabari Brown, who goes by the name Captain Treasy online, got a random phone call. The person on the other end asked him if he was free for an 11-day window. They wouldn't mention what for. Brown didn't even check his calendar and just said yes. He had no idea he'd just signed up to be a part of a Mr. Beast YouTube challenge until he showed up and found it was 100 pilots fight for a private jet challenge. A brutal elimination gauntlet against 99 other aviators. Tasks like towing planes by ropes and skydiving over the city of Riyadh were the actual hurdles the competitors had to cross to get closer to a winning chance. At one point, they had to hold on to the moving aircraft in the middle of a Riyadh freeway for 19 hours straight just to avoid elimination. And Jabari Brown was the youngest competitor in the field at just 20 years old. He completed all the challenges and he actually won. It was the kind of win that was supposed to change a life for the better. Nobody in that celebration, not Brown, not Mr. Beast, or any participant had any reason to think that this exact win was going to be the reason his name would end up in a very different kind of headline just 8 months later. The prize was a Hawker 400 XP business jet worth roughly $2.4 million. Overnight, a 20-year-old pilot became an internet millionaire in the eyes of everyone watching. But there was a problem. Even though he had won a Mr. Beast private jet, maintaining such an aircraft with hangar fees, fuel, and massive insurance was a financial nightmare. Moreover, he could not legally fly for any major airliner yet to cover for his $2.4 million jet. U.S. aviation laws requires pilots to be at least 21 before they can fly commercially, and Brown was still 20. So while the internet congratulated Brown on the epic win and moved on, Brown went back to what he had always done, picking up freelance co-pilot work and working on his training to build flight hours. But he had no idea the same training and gig would put him in the cockpit of a flight he should have never accepted. And one of those jobs put him on a Bombardier jet in Florida in late May of 2026. A completely different aircraft from the one he had won. A detail that matters more than it sounds like it should, because people on social media ran with comments and photos of a completely wrong jet, adding more confusion to this case. And that fateful flight was the one where it all began. Friday, May 29, 2026. A Bombardier jet had already been in the air for days flying routine all over the United States. Mr. Brown had an earlier leg from California to Fort Pierce, Florida as a co-pilot under a different captain. The jet with registration November 116 Hotel Lima was scheduled to fly out to a Latin American country, Paraguay. However, the pilot in command that flew from California to Florida with Jabari Brown had a scheduling conflict for the Paraguay run, so a substitute captain was brought in, Keith Seelatz. a contract pilot who interestingly had also trained Brown about a year earlier on how to fly different jets. On paper, it looked routine. Sealats knew the aircraft's owner through a pilot's Facebook group, and the plane had reportedly been leased out for this trip. 3 passengers were waiting at Fort Pierce: Troy Vasquez, David Wise, and a woman named Marisol Rivas. But one detail stood out to Sealats even before they took off. The 3 of them were checking in for what was supposed to be a 4-day trip with just a single shared bag and a couple of backpacks between them. They departed on the morning of May 29th from Fort Pierce and landed in Panama for refueling, took off again, and landed at Silvio Pettirossi International Airport in Asuncion around 9 p.m. Nothing unusual happens. The plane taxis in, everyone clears customs, and heads into Asuncion for the night. The next morning, one of the passengers comes back for a bag left on that plane, and as he heads back to exit the airport, he's intercepted by a customs officer for a quick search. After the musical instruments and a tiny bag excuse fails, things move fast. Paraguay's National Anti-Drug Secretariat, CNAD, is brought in, and they don't stop at the one bag. They search the whole aircraft. Upon CNAD's detailed search, they discovered 261.6 kilos, roughly 577 pounds of high THC cannabis valued at over $3.6 million. The authorities conclude the drug shipment must have been trafficked from Florida and must be headed to Brazil from Paraguay due to its high demand in the neighboring country. All 3 passengers are arrested on the spot. The woman Marisol Rivas and 2 men, Troy Anthony Vasquez and David Thomas Wise, all American citizens, all charged by Paraguayan prosecutors with international drug trafficking. That leaves 2 people from that cockpit unaccounted for. One of them is about to become the internet's biggest headline, and the other is nowhere to be found. The night before the drugs are found by the authorities, the captain of the flight, Keith Sealats, after successfully landing the plane, joins the passenger for dinner in the city. Then instead of staying and checking in a hotel like others, Sealats heads back to the airport, takes a layover flight back to the United States the same night, before anyone would find that the jet was filled with millions of dollars worth of illicit substances. The next morning, as Sealats lands in Miami, his phone lights up. A text from Jabari Brown mentioning that he has been arrested along with the passengers of yesterday's flight for trafficking millions of dollars worth of drugs into the country and requests him to check the news. This brings Sealats under heavy suspicion because as CNAD was still searching and seizing the aircraft, they found that the captain of the flight had already fled the country before the drug bust, making him the most wanted captain for the Paraguayan authorities. They zoomed Sealats as the owner of the Bombardier who trafficked drugs into the country and fled. By the time this video is published, new details may emerge. Sealats is still allegedly wanted by the authorities in the country and also puts him strongly in the crosshair because of some of the historical details that surfaced during the drug bust. Sealats, a 47-year-old pilot from Estonia, was a co-founder of U.S. micro-mobility startup Bolt Mobility. However, due to failed operations, the company folded in 2022, and Sealats made a major career pivot to fly jets for private clients. This became a major detail for internet speculations that to cover for his losses from the previous failed ventures, Sealats must be a part of the international drug trafficking, taking Mr. Beast's jet winner along for the wild ride. And when it came down to Jabari Brown's arrest, this is how he was captured. After the arrest of 3 passengers, the CNAD arrived at his hotel on May 30th, 2026, and he was brought in for further interrogation. Brown mentioned that he can't get hired as a full-time airline pilot yet because US law requires pilots to be at least 21, which is part of why he was doing charter and co-pilot gigs like this Paraguay flight. He submitted all the flight logs and other paperwork for the flight and mentioned he had no clue of the passengers, the luggage, or its contents. He was just hired to fly the aircraft just like his other routine flight. For him, it was nothing unusual. The authorities, after hearing Jabari's statements and going through his paperwork, thought he might be innocent. However, for the authorities, some pieces were still not adding up. Who hired the aircraft? Who had put the drugs on that plane? And why Seelats immediately left the country after the dinner? After digging deeper into the investigation, this is what they found. The aircraft itself had a paper trail. Investigators traced ownership to a man named Dennis Muturdi, who, according to Seelats, had been dry leasing out a small fleet of Bombardier business jets. Meaning, renters get just the aircraft but bring their own crew. Somewhere down that chain, the plane ended up in the hands of the Paraguay-bound group. And here is where the story becomes more interesting depending on who you ask. Paraguayan investigators initially identified passenger Troy Vasquez as the one who arranged the charter. But Seelats, the captain who left the country immediately, tell a different version. He mentioned that it was David Wise and not Troy Vasquez who leased the plane roughly a month earlier and who told him the group was flying a musician down for a concert. Neither account has been fully reconciled. It's possible both had a role. What's clear is that somebody went to real lengths to make this flight look like just another normal charter booking. And one important piece of the puzzle still sticks out like a sore thumb. The authorities speculated that the drugs seized at the airport was owned by Seelats. He knew what he was doing and fled the country before the heat caught up to him. Because according to an Estonian outlet, Seelats did own a Bombardier jet in Miami and separately flew other people's aircraft as a contract pilot as well. But are the two jets, the one owned by Seelats and the one that Mr. Beast's winner flew to Paraguay, the same or different, is still under active investigation. Then there is the luggage. 3 passengers, a 4-day trip, and by Seelats' account, they showed up with exactly 1 shared bag and a couple of backpacks between them. Not the kind of thing that raises alarms on its own. It's the same bag that less than 24 hours later, someone would come back for and lie about. The pilots also mentioned that the passengers took an unusually long time to leave the plane after landing and paid extra $1,500 for a private hangar he considered unnecessary for a small group with just 1 bag. Moreover, they learned that the passengers had hired a crew to do overnight work on the aircraft and that, in Seelats' account, the drugs were hidden in the aircraft's wall structures or beneath the floor, making the aircraft appear completely normal, keeping even the pilots clueless that they were inadvertently flying millions of dollars worth of drugs under a secret international drug trafficking operation. Because there is a real possibility that during the maintenance work hired by the group, someone could have easily stashed a couple of kilos in the wheel wells or maybe avionics bay without pilots' knowledge, could have landed in the destination country, would have waited a few days with the aircraft parked at the hangar, and would have easily removed the package with an insider involved at the airport without raising a single red flag. But if the pilots were innocent, especially Seelats, why did he leave the country immediately and is wanted by the Paraguayan authorities? The answer is simple. Keith Seelats had already pre-booked a red-eye flight back to Miami the same night they landed in Paraguay. He already had another flying contract for upcoming weekend, so he had to be back in the United States by the time. However, just because he already had a return flight pre-booked even before they left Florida does not prove his innocence and could be a part of a premeditated alibi by creating his own paper trail just to be safe. And for the 3 passengers, they still remain in pre-trial detention in Paraguay, formally charged with international drug trafficking and unauthorized possession of narcotic substances. And as far as Jabari Brown is concerned, the authorities concluded that he was completely innocent and had no connection to the trafficking operation, and he was released from custody. As of now, Seelats is not charged with any crime and is just in the circle of major suspicion just because of his unfortunate timing of leaving the country right before the drug bust. This is still an ongoing case, a few £100s and a few $1 million. But when you zoom out, it barely registers as a blip in the world of international drug trafficking. Because if you think $3.6 million is a big number, then there is a man who ran an operation so large it makes this entire case just a rounding error. A man who dominated the global market of illicit substances, outsmarted authorities for decades, and made even El Chapo look like a broke gangster by comparison.